I will visit families who will leave it to suffice it to say some very, very tragic experiences. And it doesn't make me blink a moment of fear, because I'm not there to fix what I did not break. And even if I could, I wouldn't. The brokenness is there for its own purpose. I'm there to witness and hold space, as you say, which to me is bring it, give it to me. I can take it. I assure you I can take it. And I'm not going to respond with any affirmations that tell you reasons why you're in pain. I'm a witness to your growth. I am not a conduit, because I'm here growing with you.
Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna Podcast. This podcast is meant to encourage you to connect within so you can share your light with the world. And now, here's your host, Harrison Ma.
Welcome, beautiful souls, to the Cosmic Love Antenna, another episode, another weekly installment of your inner connection to your outer expression. Today, can you predict what I'm about to say? I'm super excited for the guest, the powerful man, the powerful energy that I have on to share with you today, as I usually do within this platform and this experience that I'm building week to week here. And this beautiful being who I'm going to have a chat with today and dive deep into the mental, emotional, and most likely, knowing me, the spiritual world, is Dr. Norman Fried. And Dr. Norman Fried is a clinical doctor of psychology. He's a psychologist. He's a clinical psychologist. He's an author. He's sort of specialized and really grounds into trauma, grounds into grief, grounds into PTSD. If you live in the US, maybe he was just mentioning to me, maybe you've seen him on Dr. Phil, you've seen him on BBC News, on NBC News. But all of these things, they're powerful, they're credentials, they're things that he has experience with, but that's not why I have him here. I have him here because he is a beautiful, loving spirit and man, and I can't wait to share him with you. Dr. Norman, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored. I'm truly honored to be here.
The honor is all mine, sir, and I wish that people could see the video that we have up, the audio listeners, because you have this mood lighting in your house at the moment with a candlelight, and it suits your energy very well. And I'm excited for this conversation. So, my friend, where I want to start this chat is, I think for people to sort of get a grasp of who you are in this world, I'd love to know just a little bit about your history. So maybe let's start with your educational background and your training. Where have you started in this world?
Okay, sure. Thank you. So I studied psychology as an undergraduate in Massachusetts in a small research institution called Clark University, which is where Freud had his only American lectures. So that was cool. The beginning of. Yeah, it was really cool. Freud and Jung used to have their fights at the university. It was 1901, and so all of their letters back and forth are logged and cataloged in the library there. I graduated and I moved to Israel, and I began to work with Ethiopian refugees who were airlifted from Sudan and were ultimately brought into the country of Israel to become acclimated. And I flew there to help these beautiful African people learn about Middle Eastern culture, and they were teaching me about their culture. And we did all of this in a third language. They spoke Amharic, I spoke English, and together we learned to speak in the Hebrew language. I did learn Amharic eventually, so I was able to speak them in their mother tongue.
And Dr. Norman, sorry to interrupt you, but can I ask why? Why were you doing this? I sort of want to go just a little bit further back, because you know, and I want to get down this rabbit hole today in some of the topics we're going to talk about. But as the individual, as the being that you are, why were you pulled to either that context or starting this study in general?
I was pulled to the context of working with people in trauma, particularly because I was raised in a world where I was filled with trauma as well. I have to say that around the age of 11 or 12, I was stricken with panic disorder, but of a very bad kind. And I was struggling with panic attacks 3, 4, 5 times a day for 8 or 9 months. And for an 11-year-old boy, that's really frightening. And this is before the era of the SSRIs and any kind of meds that would give instant support. And I was raised in a home with an Orthodox Jewish father who didn't believe in psychotherapy. So I struggled a lot, and I made a commitment to myself that if I can get out of this darkness, I'm going to help other people when they come to me with a similar story. So at this point in my life, I had just graduated college, and I was thinking about going on for a PhD. And instead, I decided I'm going to work with the children that were airlifted from the Sudan desert. I had heard about them. It was called Operation Exodus. It was 1981. Or maybe it was 84. It was 1981. But whenever it was a time when these children were escaping with their mothers, and a lot of them didn't make it. And those that were brought to Israel were given a second chance at life. And I kind of wanted to connect with them. And I did very, very beautifully.
And let me ask a question about that, Norman. So I find it very interesting of a man of your experience and wisdom and background, even someone, as profoundly aware and knowledgeable and wise as you, starts in this origin of pain to purpose, right? I think it's very easy for us as individuals to overlook that story in all of us, right? I think Joseph Campbell talks about it from the hero's journey perspective. We all go through some kind of evolution, or pain comes into our lives, whether it be through our upbringing, whether it be through some kind of traumatic event. And then we have the option of not only learning from that traumatic event, but transforming it as a gift that we then share the world. So I guess, Norman, what I want to ask you from here, as this starts to expand into your journey moving forward, and this is going to lead into some other questions I want to ask you about. For you as the individual, and I'm interested in this as a practitioner myself, did you see your pain start healing through the people that you started to help? So you may be using Ethiopia as an example. I know you healed something to a degree, but when you went there and were able to help these people, and maybe even now in your clinical work, do you see this as a sort of transference of healing on your end? I always had a craving to understand pain from the point of view of other people. Probably because I lived inside of it so much of my life, and I was so scared and young, and I struggled so much in my childhood. I was raised in a home with a lot of abuse, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of drugs, and a lot of violence. And so for me, I just needed to make sense of the world. And the way I could do so was by connecting with others who also spoke the language of pain. So I guess I've always found myself drawn to people who really experience the human condition in its fullest form. Why? Possibly because I identify, also because I really feel as if that is how we all grow. I don't think anything that we've gone through in this, anything of value, any reward we receive, comes without the struggle first. And I teach a course on pastoral counseling in the School of Divinity at a seminary in New York City at Columbia University. And I teach the students, who are rabbinical students and imams and priests, that if we look at the scripture from the Old Testament and the New Testament, nothing that we've ever received in our lifetimes from God, from the Holy Spirit, has come without struggle first. And I think that that's really the human dilemma that we're all in. But as a result of the journey, nothing surprises me, Harrison, and nothing, as disturbing as these things may be in life, I say to myself, well, of course, this is what we're doing here. We're here to learn, and I really hope we have our joy, but we also have to experience the opposite of joy sometimes. Yeah. So I went from the experience of working with the Ethiopian refugees, and I discovered that I needed to have a degree
a formal degree that would allow me not just to do this work, but do it with wisdom, not lived experience, but clinical empirical data. So I came back to the United States. I studied at Emory University. I got my PhD in child and family development. And I moved on to a fellowship at Harvard Medical School, where I was working with pediatric populations, particularly children who were struggling with HIV and blood disorders. And that became the beginning of my career. I began to run a cancer center, a psychology department in a cancer center in New York. And over the next 18 or 19 years, I was the director of the psychosocial services for several hospitals where the children were being treated for pediatric hematology and oncology concerns. And as a result, I sat by the bedsides of very, very sick children, and I helped them say the necessary words of goodbye to their families. But I learned, Harrison, that the children who were at end of life don't speak about their experience in direct language. They speak in metaphor and symbolism and poetry, and it's all very veiled in a beautiful spiritual way. And I learned the poetry of end of life language, and as a result, I began to discover that this was absolutely what I was being asked to do in this lifetime.
Well, Dr. Norman, let me flow in there because I want to speak about that in a bit. I want to come back to your angel letters and the end of life elements, because I think that's a beautiful part of the work that you do in the world. But I want to pull out a point here. And I did have another sort of question I wanted to float it, but I want to bring another one forward here because I think this is really relevant to what you're talking about with the children that you're connecting with in your story. And I'm interested, my friend, a big part of the work that I do as a coach and that people come to see me, and I think we've shared some spaces on Clubhouse where we first connected together on this topic, is the conversation and the theme of the inner child and the inner child relationship that we all have within ourselves. And I can't not take this opportunity to speak with you, Norman, and get your perspective, hear your perspective as someone who's in the field doing this kind of work with beautiful souls every single day. What, in your opinion, what is your perspective on the inner child for people listening? And if someone is new to this dynamic and doesn't understand what the inner child is, what would you say to them if they were looking to lean into it to maybe help with trauma, to maybe help with an inner sort of healing journey?
I would suggest that we recognize that we have all come from somewhere, and that growing up at times, if not more often than not, is perilous and scary and traumatizing, and that we can grow up scared. And those of us that grow up scared end up really kind of putting their feelings somewhere where they don't want to touch them. Mm. And when you speak of the inner child, the way I define it and understand it is that there's a part of us that may have just stopped development at a certain age. For me, my inner child really stopped at 14. And I've moved on from that, but for so many years, I would feel as if that's where I was stuck. There are many different theories as to how to define the inner child. Suffice to say that it's a place in your development where you kind of didn't get a chance to feel the nurturance and the sense of self to develop into a different person. And not a different person, the person you were really meant to be in this life. Yeah. And so when we talk about it, it's almost as if you close your eyes and you go back home to that original house and you open the door and you walk inside and you experience what it's like to be that person at that young age. Only this time you recognize you're traveling with the adult version as well. Mm-hmm. And the adult you visits the child you and says, listen, it's going to work out. It's going to be hard, but you're going to learn so much. And you're going to be grateful, not just for the pain, but for the growth that came from the pain. And that's how I see the inner work, the work of the inner child.
It's beautiful. And if you're listening to this, if there's one word that you take away with the inner child dynamic, in my opinion, and Dr. Norma's highlighting it, it's reparenting, right? It's stepping into that field that maybe was not filled in some way by an external element. And now in your present moment, being the powerful human that you are, I like to visualize your hand out in front of you, and you have that little boy or that little girl holding on to that hand, right? And then you do all that you can to be the answer that you're looking for. If that answer was affirmation, yeah.
But yes, Harrison. And yet, in my estimation, it's not as separate as that. It's not as if this adult version of me is sitting and talking to the young version of me. It's recognizing that the young version is me. It's complicated. That I am not just visiting a boy who's unevolved, recognizing that unevolved boy really has all the seeds of evolution inside of him. And so I don't see myself as holding his hand. I see myself as basically saying, come along. I assure you, it's going to be worth it.
Love it. Again, I think this kind of work, it can be I think sometimes it can feel abstract for someone that's maybe new to this. And this leads into my next question here for you, Dr. Norman. This kind of work, that image that you just set up for me, I found it very easy to close my eyes and just imagine what you were saying. And then there was sort of internal reactions going on. But for someone new coming into this world, this is where an external element, whether it be a therapist, a coach, a practitioner, a doctor, someone outside of you, I think that's the space and place that can be very powerful for someone to get a grasp on some of these elements that sometimes are a bit hard to first lean into. So I would love to get your opinion, my friend, and I've asked you this before and I want to get it here now on the podcast. Where do you think the role of a therapist in your regard or a coach in my regard comes in within this kind of dynamic? So even outside of the inner child, maybe some of the other sort of talk therapy or therapeutical modalities, what is the power of someone holding space for you and providing a container for energy to flow?
It's interesting to use the word container, Harrison. I never really thought of it like a container. But it's true. It is a way of containing the energy that's going back and forth between patient and therapist. I want you to know that I don't approach a therapeutic session as Norman. Before every appointment, I ask God to come with me and through me and allow me to utilize my human hands and my mortal voice to do the work that God can't do without a human form. I'm not at all trying to sound arrogant. I'm actually trying to be very humble. So, and remember, the work I do is with parents whose children have been murdered or suicided or overdosed. I'm working with people who themselves have been thinking of hurting themselves and have been through awful victimization. And I literally stand there and I say, God, please purify my heart and open up whatever exists in terms of a portal here so that you can come through me. And I find myself sitting with my hands, my palms up and open, because I'm almost asking for energy to come through me. I find that if my hands are closed, I'm blocking whatever energy I could get from divine or from source. So that's one thing that I do. The other is I recognize that it doesn't matter how I say what I say. It matters that the message gets across. So I'm not afraid to sit with people who are in pain, because I don't have the answers. I never did. No one does. And I will visit families who've lost more than one child in a car accident. I will visit families who will leave it to suffice it to say some very, very tragic experiences. And it doesn't make me blink a moment of fear, because I'm not there to fix what I did not break. And even if I could, I wouldn't. The brokenness is there for its own purpose. I'm there to witness and hold space, as you say, which to me is bring it, give it to me. I can take it. I assure you I can take it. And I'm not going to respond with any affirmations that tell you reasons why you're in pain. I am a witness to your growth. I am not a conduit because I'm here growing with you. Now, why do I say it that way? Because so many people that I work with will complain to me about how loved ones and well-intentioned friends will say things like, your loved one is a better place, or God only gives us what we can handle, or heaven needed another flower. And I know why this happened to your family. And those statements are incredibly unfair. They may act as salve or balm for the speaker, but those words rarely penetrate the hearts of those that are broken. And those of us that are hurt and grieving and scared and lost know that words are not going to reach as much as very, very beautiful, open-hearted questions, curiosity, loving, honest interest in the other person's experience. I don't care if you're the Pope or the High Rabbi in Brooklyn, it doesn't matter. You don't know any more than any other human mortal being the reasons for the pain. And it's not your job to explain away something that you didn't create or destroy. However, it's your job to hold that pain so that the people with whom you sit know they're not alone. And when you do that, you don't burn out. You're not here to fix anything. There's a beautiful, beautiful story. I've told it to you before, Harrison. It's about a beautiful boy, and his mother sent him to the store to buy a loaf of bread, and he was gone a very long time. His mother began to panic and worry, and when he finally comes home, she says, "Where have you been? I just sent you for bread." And the boy said, "I know, but on the way home, I came across a little boy with a broken tricycle." And his mother said, "You don't know how to fix tricycles." And the boy said, "I know." So I sat down on the curb and I helped him cry. That's what we do, Harrison. We don't know how to fix what's broken, but we do know how to help people cry. In the process, they discover that they're not alone, that there's a healing peace, that our private sorrows are rising to a public abode where others might actually speak a language that we understand.
So
it's the best
beautiful.
we can do.
It's so beautiful.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I hope everyone's tuning into this and really going beyond even some of the words that Dr. Norman is saying, because there is a thread here. And I want to hit on a couple of things, my friend, that you said. First of all, have you ever experienced Reiki? Have you ever done any kind of Reiki healing, either as a practitioner or yourself? You've received? Yeah. Yes,
I received.
Yeah. And Reiki, it's a big part of what you were talking about, a big part of, as a Reiki practitioner myself, how I do a lot of across the ocean digital Reiki, right? So you could be a client that I could give it to and it wouldn't matter, right? The distance doesn't matter. What matters is the ability to be open to receive, and how Reiki moves is through those palms, open those palms. So for people listening, what Dr. Norman was saying about at the start of his story about really opening the hands and noticing a difference and a shift, there is a big part of that energetically when those hands, our hands they're many things. They're part of our communication. They're a part of our meridian line and our chakra system. But energetically, right, there is a big difference between palms down and palms faced up. The other element, Dr. Norman, that you hit on so beautifully is the power of love channeled through words and the ability for that love to be the change maker. So whether our words are constructed in something, so if we're working with a person that is moving through grief, that is moving through PTSD, that is moving through trauma, I think something we often overlook is the power of love behind the words in which are directed at a person. And that direction, that intention, works best if it's open rather than closed-ended. So like you said, rather than telling someone what to do, have an open heart, have an open mind, right? And allow that energy to flow, which is what I want to lead into, Dr. Norman, to get your opinion, see what bubbles up. how does what we're saying thus far impact PTSD? So PTSD is a topic, is an area that I myself am interested in. I'm sure people listening to this have either have someone in their life or maybe them personally have experienced some kind of PTSD and past traumatic trauma. I'm wondering your perspective and your opinion on, what we've been discussing thus far, and you being a specialist, where does this ravel into the story, into the equation?
All right. Well, thank you for that. What's so interesting about the experiences of PTSD is that we struggle because we've been hurt. And the way that we are able to heal is not to bury our emotions, not to bury our story, but to actually do quite the opposite, which is against common sense, Harrison. Most of us will be told, don't think sad thoughts, think happy thoughts. You've been through enough. But the truth is, we don't enter into trauma. Trauma enters into us. We didn't ask for this, but it happened. And so the way we are able to heal is by showing the trauma the door, opening a window and saying, you can't stay in here forever. And therefore, the power of a loving connection and the power of loving words is the beginning process of healing. How so? Because every one of us, Harrison, has a story to tell. A story of woe, a story of wonder, perhaps both. And when we find someone who's capable of listening to that story in all of its gory details, without minimizing us and telling us that it'll get better because it doesn't necessarily work that way, the sooner we begin to recognize that we have found someone that can bear witness to our pain. And we begin to own this as part of our identity, but not the sole defining entity of who we are. And in a neurological way, we almost carve out some type of place in our brains for this rest information to rest in. It's almost like the trauma we've been experiencing circles around our head and looking for a place to rest, and eventually it does find that place. It finds that place through the power of words and the power of story. And if you can find someone who's capable of listening to your story, you are going to begin the process of healing. And so many people don't have that fortune. They have good friends. We have good friends that say, yeah, I know you told me that part, but then what happened? No, I don't need to tell you what happened after. I need to tell you what happened over and over and over.
I need the space. Yeah,
exactly. There was a time when I was working with the families of the TWA Flight 800 had crashed into the East Mauritius River here in New York. And I would go to the hotel at one of the airports and I would sit with these family members for hours, for weeks on end. And they would tell me every single day the same story, where they were when they heard the news of the airplane crash, where they thought their loved one was sitting at the moment. And after 3 or 4 days of hearing the same exact story, I was inspired, but I wouldn't. But I was inclined to say, yeah, I know that part, but what happened next? But it hit me that it didn't matter what happened next. It didn't matter at all what it was I heard. What mattered is that they could say it again and again until it became a piece of their reality. That's the power of words.
This is, Dr. Norman, you're hitting me to my core here, and for a couple of reasons. So first of all, maybe you've heard me speak about this. I know people listening are probably almost sick of me speaking about this thus far, but I'm going to keep going because it's so important to hear. It's the power of the throat chakra, right? I speak about the energetic centers and the systems within us. And the throat chakra is exactly what you're saying, right? It is the space and place in which when we can open it, right? When we're given the opportunity to really allow it to flow through the stories, through the words, through our innate needs, through our innate wants, right? That in itself is healing. That in itself is clearing. But I'm interested, Dr. Norman, this is what was bubbling up as you were speaking. You talked about how trauma settles in the words and the stories that we need to express and speak. I'm wondering your perspective, and just to give a bit of background here, a lot of work that I do is with the body, with the physical body, and how in many ways through traumatic events, PTSD and or otherwise, the inner child, many of the things we've talked about thus far, the body can keep score also. Right, the physical body and the tissues within our system can also hold on whether energetically, emotionally. So I'm wondering, and I know this maybe is probably not your area of expertise. Maybe I just want to get your opinion on this. How do you think that factors into this equation with the trauma story and maybe the speaking and the words?
Please remember that that everything that we experience is going to be kept inside the body, and our bodies do not lie. Our minds can lie to us all the time, but our bodies will never lie. It'll tell you what you need to know. There's an amazing book written by Bessel van der Kolk.
Body Keeps Score.
The Body Keeps the Score. And he describes so beautifully about endogenous opioids in our brainstem, right above our spinal column. And inside of this part of our brain, we have opioids that when we go through a traumatic event, they become triggered and they become energized and ignited. And then we experience in the midst of the trauma an attempt at feeling better through the opiate system. And what happens is that it traps itself in our bodies. And when the trauma leaves, the opiates leave. And we go into a withdrawal where we actually begin to crave that feeling again. No, we're not gluttons for punishment. No, we don't want to be hurt. But when it happens, we then get a resurgence of the energized opioids in our natural brain. So there's a physiological explanation as well as a psychological explanation as to why trauma engenders more trauma in our lives.
Trauma bonding,
the body
right?
does keep this. And one of those examples would be through trauma bonding, whereby we find ourselves in the presence of someone who we might consider as a twin flame or some kind of soulmate, when it really is someone that, from a psychiatric perspective, is very transferentially connected to who we were with as children. And they're letting us have what's called a pathological nurturance, Harrison.
Yeah.
They're letting us we get to do our stuff, which is not so good as long as they get to theirs. So the pathological nurturance says, I'll allow you to hurt me if you allow me to continue doing drugs. And it's all an unconscious process. But this kind of contract that we make with this trauma bond continues to keep us in a place where we are stuck. Healthy love only wants one thing. It wants the other to become the best version of itself. It does not know jealousy. It does not know envy. It does not know competition. As it says in Corinthians, right? Love is pure. Love is good. And when you feel as if you're competing, you're in a trauma bond that has its roots in something much earlier than where you are at this moment in life today.
So important. If you're listening to this conversation and you take one thing from this chat, is that last 2 minutes. It's so important, from the trauma bonding to the attachment styles growing up, from, I've spoken about this before. And I think at the time I released this episode, I'm going to release some other episodes around the inner child and our inner child wounds that maybe, we've moved through or haven't moved through, more importantly. They're going to show up in those adult relationships in many ways, like you were saying. And if we have not had the time and space to really bring awareness to what we are attracting, not attracting so we can be punished, attracting in many ways from maybe a spiritual perspective so we can heal, right? And we're going to continue in some unconscious loops, until we bring it into awareness. Would you agree with that, Dr. Norman?
100%. It is an unconscious loop that we find ourselves in. But it's important to remember that even when we bring it into awareness, that's only half the battle. Understanding the etiology of where we struggled and where we came from is very important. But that then gives us the next important feature of our work, which is to try something different and take the risk. So someone who was engaged in a traumatic connection with an abuser growing up might actually find that they are connecting comfortably with people who are bad for them. But as much as we don't want to be mistreated, we don't know any other way. That's what our unconscious knows.
Yeah.
So when I work with someone who's understanding where it is that they came from, they may gain access to that wisdom, but now they have to start loving and living differently. And that's scary. That's when a beautiful relationship goes bad, because it's not something that they're used to.
Yes. So important that, and I want to get your opinion on this, Dr. Norman. I explain that as the safety mechanism of the ego mind structure, right? It's almost like a protection mechanism in many ways, is that when they start going outside of that, that's when maybe those old protection mechanisms are wanting to reactivate and bring the person back into their safety and their comfort zone and what they're familiar with. But maybe unconsciously, or maybe there is an element they're unaware of. It's actually outside of that safety zone, that familiar zone, that comfort zone is where growth and expansion occurs. So we can start healing these mechanisms. Would you agree with that? Is that a accurate analysis, or would you say it differently?
I would say it exactly like that. And I would add, this is the dialectic of the human condition. It's the swinging of the pendulum from good to bad, and that humanity has always been caught in the pendulum swing. We will have good, we will have bad, and we hopefully will learn from both. But inside of all of that struggle is the medicine that's here to heal us. So even though I may find myself recapitulating old patterns, I have to until I don't have to anymore. And there comes a time, with the help of therapists or psychic healers or spiritual guides, there comes a time when the psyche says, I've had enough and I want something healthy. And that's because the human condition strives for improvement at all times. Even those of us who have been hurt, we strive to improve our souls.
Oh, that goosebumps with that one, Dr. Norman. It's because we live in a society and culture at the moment that teaches the opposite, unfortunately. Right? There is a culture and there's a system of systems. I was just having a conversation about this with a colleague, that we live in a world where there is a system of systems that, there's sick care and symptom care, and this idea that if we are aging with any kind of dis-ease or challenge, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, then that is normal, right? That's just a symptom of getting older. And if you're uncomfortable, if you're in a chronic challenge, again, either mentally in any aspect, then just treat it. Just treat it, the symptoms, just, every now and then hit the top of it. But this is something you're going to have to learn to deal with. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying that there is a deeper state of healing and homeostasis that we all can connect into. Am I hearing that right?
I am saying that. And the way that one reaches that level, that place, which is hard to define, is through embracing the pain until you can place the pain, right? We go back to the Old Testament, the story of Jonah, who was swallowed up by the ocean and then carried away into the belly of a whale. And Jonah sits alone in the belly of the whale. It's a beautiful metaphor. And he says to God, I'd rather die than have a fate such as this one. And God says, sit a while, Jonah. There's something to be learned inside this darkness. And we all need to understand that in the darkness, there's wisdom to be gained. Only we don't have that patience. We're human beings. We are ego-driven and ego-debilitated. And as a result of that, we want relief immediately. And what I'm saying, Harrison, is that the journey forward is to learn to live in the discomfort, to learn to tolerate the darkness, and whatever it is that it came here to teach us, because there is life on the other side.
Dr. Norman, I have a sort of statement and a definition of health that I want to share with you. And it connects to that beautiful Jonah story and what we're talking about here in regards to taking steps through the pain to really expand. And this definition of health that I want to share with you is from one of my mentors, Mr. Paul Chek, that I've taken and added a little bit to, but I think it's a very profound sentence for people to hear around what we're saying here. And the definition of health is the following: health And when I say health, I mean mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. It applies to all of them, right? Health is a honest willingness to engage your body, mind, and or spirit such that you see challenges as an integral process of creating and living your dreams. And to me, and I want to get your feedback on this, my friend, to me, it's highlighting exactly what you're saying. And it's highlighting that now we see health. In this instance, we're talking about sort of the mental structures and the emotional structures. We see health as a state of being rather than a destination and a space that we get to, and then we think, okay, we're all good. It also helps us see that I can be healthy even in a state, like you are saying, of challenge, of pain, of disease, if I see it as this is happening for me, not to me. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that. I do. And I also feel as if, in terms of the way you read the definition of health, it is part of an ever unfolding process. We are never fully healed. We are always healing. It is present tense, not past perfect. If we're healed, we reach the next level, which is the world to come. But we're on the journey towards healing. And hopefully we're always going in the right direction. I would say to you that there's a beautiful, beautiful line in a book written by Andre Aciman. It became a movie, Call Me By Your Name. This particular line never made it in the movie. In the line in the movie, the father says to the son, who's experiencing severe heartbreak, he says, I do not envy you the pain, but I envy you the growth. And that's the dialectic of our life. We will grow, but not without the pain. It's as if the work of trauma, the work of soul development, it's as if your soul is in the gym. When you go to the gym and you pick up 100 pounds and you sweat and you really work out, you come home and you can't bring a spoon to your mouth. You rip the muscle. But a week later, you can go to the gym and you can pick up bigger muscle and you discover it's growing. Bigger weights, and you discover your muscles growing. So I say that the tears that we cry in our human form are the sweat of the soul having its work out, right?
100%.
And when the soul has its work out, as much as it hurts, it's getting stronger and more refined and more defined and more prepared for its return from whence it came.
Oh. Dr. Norman, I could talk about this all day with you, my friend. That is so profound and aligns, you're welcome, and it aligns with something that I like to say a lot, if people have heard me saying it, is I believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and how that spiritual being speaks through the physical experience, the physical body. One of the ways is through the communications of the emotions coming through, right? When someone wants to grieve, for example, and they're looking to express that sadness, that grief through tears and the emotions around the tears, that is not just a healthy state to be in and a healthy release of energy. That is truly that spiritual being having that communication through the physical body, in this instance, through the emotion of, or the feeling of grief, sadness, and then the physical representation of tears. So it's beautiful, and it helps us see the holistic beings that we are.
I would agree with you. I want to just quickly say, I don't believe that human beings want to grieve, but I know that human beings have to grieve. And when we have to, when we're called to this task, and every one of us is and will be called to this task, we do it by allowing our soul to grow through the pain.
Love it, sir. I want to switch gears here a little bit to something that I promised we'd talk about at the start, and I want to come back to it now. And it's this idea of, you're an author, my friend, and you've written many powerful books. And one of the books you have authored is, and I'm probably getting the title wrong here, but it's something along the lines of Angel Letters and Lessons from the Dying. I think that is is that the correct title, my friend?
The title is, it's entitled The Angel Letters, and the subtitle is Lessons That Dying Can Teach Us About Living.
Beautiful.
And it's a series of letters that I wrote to children after their death about what their dying taught me about living a better life, and how I help them say the necessary words of goodbye to their parents before they left their bodies.
It's profound in itself. And I would highly encourage anyone that is really tuning into this chat and being pulled to Dr. Norman's work to check out his resource and that expression of his love. But what I've heard you speak about the book before, and I've heard you speak about the angel letters. And what I'm interested, just out of curiosity, Dr. Norman, because I don't think I've asked you this before, what's your view on loving entities around us, specifically loving entities? So an example would be angels, right? But other ones you could call, spirit guides, ancestors, many others. What is your either experience, your perspective, your opinion on these loving entities around this time, around when we do have a departing, there is a death? What do you feel? What have you noticed? What are your thoughts around these loving entities and what role they play in this process, in this transition?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've spent 30 years in hospitals by the bedsides of people who are dying. And I look around at these moments to say, are the angels here? Are there spirit guides here? I don't have that gift. I can't sing like Andrea Bocelli and I can't see the spirits, but I do believe that they are here. And that's the faith. It's not evidence. I wasn't given that gift, but I was given the gift of actually having faith that without any palpable evidence, I'm absolutely certain that they surround us at moments when we need them. I can tell you that when a patient dies, I'm visited by them for many, many days after they pass, as they pass. And they come to me in music, in messages on billboards, in things I see in nature. And they are very, very clear. But that is their way of saying to me, thank you, and I'm on my way, and I'm okay. When I sit around the bedside of someone who is dying, I'm not actually experiencing the spirit guides. I just am certain that they're there. And I'll tell you something else. In the work that I do with so many grieving people, I literally say to the patient, your son is right here. Your father is right here. I'm not saying I see them because it's not my gift, but I know they're there. And there are times when I will actually start a session by talking to the loved one who passed, and I'll say, please come with me through the session as I help your mother or father make it through the next hour. And I sit, as I said before, with my palms open, because when you think about it, when babies are born, they're born with their fists closed. And when people die with their arms open. And the middle of between birth and death, we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out which is the better way. And I really think that when we can leave our hands open, we surrender. So I leave my hands open. They're hard to hold, but they're also very available to spirit. And so I expect that energy comes through that isn't even given to me, it's given through me. That's the best answer I can give you, Harrison. I've not seen, but I've experienced, I felt, and I have a knowing that is something I don't have to challenge or be challenged by. It's my knowing. There are times when I'll tell a story about my own mother or father who are both, in heaven, and I'll say something about them, and then when the session's over, I'll say, "I'm sorry, Dad. I know that probably didn't really sound very nice, but that's really my view of what happened in those days."
Yeah.
And I know that they're here and they're listening. And I also know that I don't need to apologize because they're in a plane of existence that doesn't experience shame or anger. But they know I'm in a human mortal meat suit that doesn't experience what they experience, but rather is limited by a very debilitating ego.
Yes.
And I don't have the freedom of consciousness that they have. So I say, I'm sorry. And I know they say it's okay.
So my friend, I'm going to maybe make this a bit of a teaching moment for you. I'd love to share something with you here. And so thank you for sharing that experience. And that knowing that you spoke of, I think, is the most important element of what you shared. It was all important, but that knowing is not for people listening, that is not a Dr. Norman thing. That is something that we all have access to all the time. Our ability to tap into it, our openness, our willingness, that is the thing that changes. And Dr. Norman, I'm wondering, I would love to challenge you here and maybe give you a bit of homework, because I do know, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you are still working with children and the departing, or is it that's finished now? Is this still something that's happening?
It's not that it's finished. It's just that I found that I needed to leave the centers so I could do more private work and write more. So I spend more of my days with the survivors after a death has occurred. Okay,
good. So what I would suggest, and just see how this feels for you, and I'm sharing this now because I want to share this with everyone else listening. And I did a Clubhouse room on this morning. And so it's fresh on my mind. We, in my opinion, my belief, we all have access to spiritual senses, right? Whether you want to call them channeling, deeper senses of awareness, knowing, intuition, whether you want to call them the clair senses, the clairaudience, the clairvoyance, the claircognizance, all those things. What helps us expand them more? So, and this was triggered, Dr. Norman, by what you said about, I don't have the seeing or the other abilities. And that's what I want to challenge here, Dr. Norman. I would respectfully disagree, because what I've seen of you and what I've seen, how much love you give the world and the way that you approach people, I feel and I know that there is more inside of you, that there is more for your love to express itself. So I want to throw it back to you and see how this feels for you. Would you yourself be open to going deeper into these senses that you have?
I've always wanted to. I've even tried. The answer is yes. It's very complicated, because in order to do the kind of grief therapy I do, I need to be grounded in here and now, even though I might have a sense of what's going on in the there and always. So the answer is yes, but with trepidation.
Yeah, of course, especially with the kind of work that you do. But I wanted to add that in, my friend, because I know you have the same belief as me, and it's this idea that we are walking on this path, this soul path that we all walk, right? And on that path, we are led in certain directions and given certain things to express and share with the world, as you shared at the start of this chat with your story, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence that we met. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that we have such an affinity for each other. I love you very much, and I know you've shared that with me. So yeah, just let me know. Let me know how it goes. And if you ever feel called, if you need a bit of help with this, I'm always willing to give a bit of support, just so you know.
I do appreciate that. I do. And I will take you up on the offer. I do want you to know that in 30 years of doing therapy, it's been hard for me to distinguish what was a psychic moment versus a psychotic moment. And I'm not joking. I have patients who go into fugue states and they think that they actually spoke or received information from another plane. And I think that they actually had more of a dissociative event because of their own trauma.
Let's talk about this, Dr. Norman, because I think this is a very good point. I think this is a very fine line that people don't know how to balance. How do you approach that? How do you distinguish, in your opinion, the difference?
The way I distinguish the difference is by having healthy boundaries. So when someone will tell me in my office, and it's happened, Harrison, I've had patients that will say to me, you know, your mother's here. Oh, no, your father's here too. And I'll say, well, my mother and father are in heaven. No, but they're here. They're here. They're right here. And I have to decide if I'm going to be impacted by that on a boundaryless way, which means I'll believe it, or if I can erect a healthy boundary and say, now, what is this patient's purpose in doing this?
Yes.
Because my mom and dad, who I know exist in some manner, would never interrupt a therapy session. They just wouldn't. So I have to determine with my cognitive abilities, my mortal brain,
yes,
what else could be going on. And if I am over involved in learning what it is that person wants to say, I may be susceptible to believing something that's not true.
Yeah.
But if I'm recognizing that this actually may be something that is here for me to learn from, I'll spend more time trying to understand it. It's about boundaries, Harrison, because the work of psychotherapy requires really, really defined relations.
I would add to this, my friend, and say, I agree with the boundaries. And I would also say, be willing to ask yourself the question, meaning that I'll just give an example of something I've noticed similar to this, not in a sort of clinical setting, much like yours, but maybe people can imagine this. I get, a quite amount of messages asking me about these kind of things on a regular basis. And sometimes I have people come up to me and say similar things. They say, I've had this download last night. This is what had happened. We've spent a previous life together. And in that life, you were my daughter, or you were my father, or whatever the relationship was. And because of that, now we need to do said thing. And one, the boundaries come in, like you gave the example of. But two, what I would add is, like you said, with the sort of the logical brain, or even just an inner dialogue, ask yourself, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe they have good intentions. Maybe they don't. But how does this feel for me? Still check that box and ask yourself, okay, is this, like you said, is this appropriate right now? Or how does my inner voice react to this? What is my inner voice? What's the opinion of my voice? Don't disconnect from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's true. And it makes a lot of sense, Harrison. It's why I say to you that I listen to my body, because my body never lies, but my mind does. So when I'm in the presence of someone who is shifting into a topic that doesn't feel right in the body, it's not a function of fear. That's cognition. It's a function of physiology that's saying, this isn't right. And you've given this body understand what's happening inside of it. And what's happening inside of it is telling you something. Yeah. And that's really where the idea, not the idea, but the training of being a psychotherapist comes from. I really have to take a look at what people are saying on many different levels, many levels. Even a joke made in therapy is interpreted by me in 3 to 5 different ways. It just is. And it makes for difficult conversations at dinner, but it makes for fascinating therapy. It really does. That doesn't mean I respond to all of it, but I catch it like, oh, okay, there's that. Oh, and that one just came flying. Yeah. Okay, let me hold these, because there's a lot of unconscious transference being flown in this room. And I want to see how much of it is needed and how much of it I can let go of. And people think, oh, this is an easy job. You get paid a lot of money to sit and listen to people talk. They don't understand that I'm lending not just my ears, I'm lending my psyche. At the end of an hour, I'm exhausted. I'm beat up because I'm feeling the projections, the energy that they don't want to feel, and they throw it onto me in some unconscious and sometimes unkind way. Yeah. And at the end of the hour, I have to do 20 to 50 push-ups just to be prepared for the next session. Right. And that's because there's so many ways to interpret and understand what is being said with words.
So much. It's so important. I was just laughing, Dr. Norman, because I was just visualizing that, and I was contrasting it to the dinner setting. And I think, and I'll end with this, and I'm speaking of energy. I want to be mindful of your energy, my friend. I know it's late there, so I want to wrap this up, but I have one more question for you. But as people heard that from Dr. Norman, I really want people to sit with this idea that, the coach, the therapist, the clinician, the practitioner that you're working with, see that they are very human too, right? They might have these beautiful modalities and these abilities that they're supporting you with, whether they're trained in some sort of background or they have innate skills, but see them as there is a human side that has a very finite amount of resources that we need to be aware of on both sides of the relationship. Dr. Norman, I have one more question for you. And before I get to that, I want to give you a bit of space here now. As people have been listening, like I said at the start, as promised, you're a beautiful, loving, expansive light in this world. And if someone listening wants to get in touch with you, maybe they want to learn more, what are some maybe resources? We talked about your books, or maybe, I know you spend a lot of time on Clubhouse. Where can people see more and connect into more of your work?
Thank you, Harrison. I think that the first answer that comes to my mind is that you can follow me on Instagram. I have a 60-second video that I post every day. It's about 850 days straight now, where I just talk for 59 seconds about my thoughts on surviving trauma as gleaned from a therapy session I may have had, or a chapter in a book I've just finished reading, and how it impacts human life and soul life. So I would say check out @NormanFried, which is simply NormanFried. You can go to Amazon.com and read any of the books I've written. They're very personal as well as very professional. I wrote a book about my mother's death and the lessons that I learned from her death, but it's also written with a significant eye towards the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Scripture, and how that impacts grief. As well as other professional books I write that have to do with surviving loss. So you can find that on Amazon.com. You can follow me there, or you can follow me on Instagram. Certainly hope I'll be more available and more available to people as time goes on. I'd love that.
And Dr. Norman spends a lot of time on Clubhouse. That is where we met. So you can also catch him there. If he's not on Instagram, he spends time there, and you might see me in a room with him holding space. Dr. Norman, what I'll do is, for everyone interested in listening, I'll put all those details in the show notes of this episode. So if you're listening, go to the show notes. You'll see Dr. Norman's resources. I'll put them there so you can click on them and go to the links, go to the websites, do all the things. And I would highly recommend those Instagram videos, because I learn a lot from them, my friend. And again, I think there is, especially as a practitioner, as a therapist, as a coach, we can learn a lot by seeing someone's face and them sharing their words. And you're quite good and loving at that. Speaking of love, my friend, a big part of this is my last question for you as we wrap up. The mission, the intention of the Cosmic Love Antenna is connecting into a deeper sense of self-love, so we can then express that love outwards into the cosmos. And I'm wondering, my friend, how would you define that word, your personal definition of love?
It's a connection to a power that we don't completely understand, but know exists, and are learning more and more and getting closer and closer to every living day. It's appreciation. It's eternal gratitude. It's recognition that goodness does exist and can last. And it comes in very different forms, and sometimes dark forms, but exists. And when we can find ourselves enraptured with that feeling, we heal.
What a beautiful, loving full stop to the end of this chat. Dr. Norman Fried, I love you very much, my friend. Thank you for spending.
I love you too. Thank you.
Thank you for spending this evening with me, sharing your love, sharing your guidance, sharing your wisdom. Beautiful, beautiful souls, beautiful beings out there in the podcast world. I hope you enjoyed this recording. I'm always open to feedback and comments and reviews. So if you did enjoy this conversation, please make sure you go down into the Apple Podcasts and leave your thoughts for myself and Dr. Norman. But with that, I'm wishing everyone a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This has been another episode of the Cosmic Love Antenna. Dr. Norman, thank you for being here, and I'm wishing everyone a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow Harrison on Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse at Harrison Ma. That's Harrison, Meagher.